Barron Trump had never been one to seek the spotlight. Growing up in the glare of the media, he had learned early on that the press could twist anything he said, distort his words, and weaponize even the smallest remark. For years, he remained silent, observing, learning, and preparing for the moment when he would finally step forward. That moment came sooner than anyone expected. A major news network had invited him to a televised debate, underestimating him as nothing more than the son of a former president. The host, Daniel Whitmore, was known for his aggressive style, interrupting, twisting facts, and using loaded questions to corner his guests. He had humiliated many conservative voices in the past, making them fumble under pressure. He thought Barron would be just another easy target. He was wrong. The debate was scheduled for prime time, and America tuned in expecting fireworks. Whitmore's network had promoted the segment relentlessly, hyping it as a real test of Barron Trump's intellect and political awareness. They saw him as an inexperienced young man who had grown up in privilege, someone they could easily maneuver. When the cameras turned on, Barron sat calmly across from Whitmore, his expression unreadable. He was taller than the host, his presence commanding, yet his demeanor remained composed. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to win. Whitmore leaned forward with a smirk. "Barron, you come from a wealthy family. Many argue that you don't understand the struggles of ordinary Americans. What do you say to those who claim you're out of touch?" Barron didn't blink. "That's an interesting way to start a debate. Instead of discussing policy, you go straight to personal attacks. If we're talking about being out of touch, let's address the fact that you, Mr. Whitmore, make millions of dollars a year to sit behind this desk and lecture Americans on struggles you've never faced." The audience gasped. Whitmore's smirk faltered. Barron continued, his voice steady. "You live in a gated community, send your kids to private school, and have an entire team of researchers feeding you talking points. Yet, you pretend to speak for the working class, so tell me, who's really out of touch?" Whitmore forced a chuckle. "All right, let's talk policy then. Your father's administration was criticized for many things." Barron held up a hand. "Name one policy that you personally disagree with and explain why." Whitmore hesitated. Barron leaned forward slightly. "I'll wait." The silence in the studio was deafening. The host shuffled his notes, searching for something, anything. But Barron had caught him off guard. After a long pause, Whitmore stammered, "Well, many have argued that his tax cuts only benefited the rich." Barron nodded. "I expected that response. Now let's break it down. Under my father's administration, the economy saw historic growth, unemployment hit record lows, and minority wages increased significantly. The tax cuts benefited small businesses and middle-class families. So do you disagree with the results, or do you just not like the person who made it happen?" The audience erupted in applause. Whitmore's face turned red. He was losing control of the debate, and worse, he was losing his composure. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Desperate to regain control, he snapped, "You're deflecting. Let's talk about January 6th. Barron shook his head. The last resort of every media personality who has nothing else to argue. When in doubt, bring up January 6th. The crowd laughed. Barron's tone turned serious. "Let's be clear. I condemn political violence of any kind. But if you truly care about democracy, why don't you ever talk about the riots that burned cities for months? Why is political violence only bad when it fits your narrative?" Whitmore's mouth opened, but no words came out. He had spent years dominating debates, cutting off guests, and controlling conversations. But now, he was the one being exposed. Barron wasn't just answering his questions, he was dismantling him in real time. For the next 30 minutes, it was a masterclass. Every time Whitmore tried to bait him, Barron calmly turned it back on him. He exposed the hypocrisy of the media, called out the network's double standards, and refused to be rattled. By the time the debate ended, America had witnessed something remarkable. The son of a former president had just outclassed one of the most seasoned media figures in the country. The clip went viral within hours. Social media exploded. Barron Trump just ended Daniel Whitmore's career. The media underestimated him. Huge mistake. This is the moment everything changed. Even those who weren't Trump supporters admitted they were impressed. The media scrambled to spin the story, but the truth was undeniable. Barron Trump had arrived. As the cameras turned off, Whitmore stood up quickly, avoiding eye contact. Barron extended his hand with a polite smile. "No hard feelings," he said. Whitmore hesitated before shaking it, his grip weak. He knew what had just happened. He had walked into this debate expecting to humiliate Barron Trump. Instead, he had been destroyed, and America had seen it all. The fallout from the debate was immediate and brutal. Within hours, clips of Barron Trump's performance dominated every corner of social media. His calm, surgical takedown of Daniel Whitmore had struck a nerve, not just with conservatives, but with millions of Americans who had grown tired of the media's bias. Whitmore's network scrambled to control the damage. At first, they tried to downplay the debate, selectively editing clips to make it seem as though Barron had been evasive or inexperienced. But it didn't work. The full, uncut debate was everywhere: YouTube, Twitter, independent news sites. People had seen the truth, and no amount of media spin could erase what had happened. Even some of Whitmore's usual defenders in the press hesitated to rally behind him. Behind the scenes, network executives were furious. He had been brought in to crush Barron Trump, to expose him as an uninformed rich kid who couldn't handle tough questions. Instead, Whitmore had been the one exposed, and the consequences were about to hit him hard. The next morning, Whitmore arrived at the network headquarters, expecting an emergency strategy meeting. Instead, he was greeted with cold stares and whispers as he walked through the hallway. Staffers avoided eye contact. Producers who had once sung his praises now barely acknowledged him. He stepped into the executive conference room where the network's top brass sat waiting. "Daniel, the network," President began, his tone heavy. "We need to talk about last night." Whitmore shifted in his seat. "I know it wasn't my best performance, but I can handle the backlash. We just need to—" The president cut him off. "We don't need damage control. We need a scapegoat." Whitmore's stomach dropped. "You embarrassed this network," another executive said, glaring at him. "We gave you a simple task. Control the narrative, expose him. Instead, you let a 6, 7, 18-year-old walk all over you on live television." Whitmore's jaw clenched. That debate wasn't fair. He was prepared. Someone must have coached him. He dodged my questions and— "No, Daniel," the president interrupted. "He destroyed you. And now, we have a problem." There was a long pause. The president sighed, then slid a piece of paper across the table. Whitmore looked down. It was a pre-written resignation letter. He felt his pulse quicken. "You're firing me?" "We're giving you the chance to resign," the president said flatly. "It'll look better for you. Say you're stepping away for personal reasons. Take the hint." Whitmore felt a rush of panic. He had spent years building his career, climbing to the top of the industry, and now in one night it was all slipping away. "Barron Trump isn't going anywhere," another executive said. "He's going to be a force, and thanks to you, we just made him even more powerful." Whitmore's hands trembled as he signed his name at the bottom of the letter. He had no choice. Meanwhile, Barron Trump sat in a quiet office, watching the chaos unfold on his phone. "Whitmore's out," Barrington texted him. "You took down one of the biggest TV hosts in the country in less than 24 hours. Not bad." Barron smirked. This was only the beginning. Barron leaned back in his chair, watching as the news cycles devoured their own. The same networks that once praised Whitmore as a hard-hitting journalist were now calling him an outdated relic of media bias. His own colleagues were distancing themselves, pretending they had never admired him. Just days earlier, they had cheered him on, expecting him to humiliate Barron. Now they were erasing his name from their scripts, already looking for their next attack dog. But Barron wasn't concerned with Whitmore anymore. He was already thinking ahead. His debate performance had done more than expose the media. It had launched him into the national conversation. People weren't just talking about how he dismantled a seasoned journalist. They were asking questions. What did Barron Trump believe? Was he going to follow in his father's footsteps? Was this just the beginning, and the political world had noticed. His phone was flooded with calls from conservative leaders, political strategists, and donors eager to speak with him. Some wanted him to endorse candidates. Others suggested he should consider a future in politics himself. Then one particular text caught his eye. It was from an unknown number. "You're not like the others. Call me when you're ready." No name. No explanation. Barron stared at the message for a moment, then locked his phone. Meanwhile, deep within the media establishment, a crisis meeting was underway. Executives from multiple networks, powerful donors and political operatives had gathered in a private boardroom analyzing the damage. "This wasn't supposed to happen," one of them growled. "We thought Barron Trump would crumble. Instead, he embarrassed us." "He's too disciplined," another added, "not reckless like his father. He doesn't take the bait, he stays composed. That makes him dangerous." A long silence followed. Finally, a senior strategist spoke. "We underestimated him. That won't happen again." A woman at the table leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" The strategist smirked. "We do what we always do, we rewrite the narrative." Over the next several weeks, the media shifted tactics. They ran hit pieces claiming Barron had been secretly coached by political elites. They dug through his past, searching for anything that could be twisted against him. Anonymous sources whispered about concerning social media posts from years ago, but nothing concrete materialized. They even tried to mock him, but that backfired. The more they attacked him, the more support he gained. People saw through the smear campaign, and Barron knew exactly how to handle it. Instead of reacting angrily, he responded with sharp, calculated remarks, never giving them the reaction they wanted. His following grew, his influence expanded, and soon a new question began circulating among political insiders. Was Barron Trump the future of the movement? Late one night, Barron stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the glow of the skyline stretching out before him. He had always known his family name came with expectations, with power, with enemies. But now, for the first time, he felt something, different opportunity. The media had tried to destroy him. Instead, they had elevated him, and he wasn't done yet, not even close. Barron Trump knew the game now. The media, the political machine, the establishment, they all operated on the same predictable patterns. First, they ignored you. Then, they mocked you. When that didn't work, they attacked. And when you survived the attacks, they panicked. And right now, they were panicking. He was sitting in a quiet, private study, scrolling through the latest headlines. Barron Trump's dangerous rise. Is he the next populist threat? Inside Barron Trump's secret political network, who's really pulling the strings? Trump Dynasty 2.0? The former first son sparks political speculation? He chuckled. They had tried to portray him as inexperienced, but when that failed, they pivoted to calling him dangerous. They had nothing real on him, so they resorted to fear-mongering. The American people, however, weren't buying it. His debate with Whitmore had been the spark, but what followed was an inferno. His social media presence had exploded. Political commentators, both supporters and critics, were dissecting his every word. And then, there were the invitations. Donors, grassroots leaders, political insiders, they all wanted to meet with him. Some pitched him on running for office. Others asked if he would endorse rising candidates, but he wasn't in a rush. This wasn't about jumping into the political machine on their terms. He was going to do it his way. Meanwhile, in Washington, a secret meeting was taking place. A group of senior operatives, media executives, and political power brokers had gathered behind closed doors. "We have a problem," one of them said, setting down a thick dossier filled with reports on Barron Trump's sudden influence. A veteran strategist leaned back in his chair. "We underestimated him. We thought he was just a kid." "He's not just a kid," another said. "He's disciplined, calculated, and worst of all, he's untouchable." The room fell silent. That was the real issue, wasn't it? Barron had no scandals, no reckless behavior, no weaknesses they could exploit. They had spent years crafting attacks for his father, some fair, many manufactured. But Barron was a different beast entirely. A woman at the end of the table cleared her throat. "We need to stop him before he builds momentum. We need a narrative, something that sticks." An older man steepled his fingers. "We don't just need a narrative. We need a controlled opposition. Someone young, polished, with media backing. Someone we can position as the reasonable alternative to Barron." A name was floated. A well-spoken, carefully groomed political figure who had been waiting for their shot. The plan was forming. If they couldn't destroy Barron, they would try to divide his base. But Barron had already anticipated this move. Sitting in a dimly lit room, he went over reports from his own team, political insiders who had been feeding him information about how the establishment was responding to him. "They're already trying to prop up a controlled conservative voice against you," Barrington said, tossing a folder onto the table. "They're setting up a rival before you've even announced anything." Barron smirked. "Of course they are. They don't want another Trump rising up. They want someone who plays by their rules." Barron leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the table. "Then we don't play by their rules." Over the next few months, Barron continued his rise, but on his terms. He didn't rush into endorsements. He didn't make impulsive decisions. Instead, he traveled the country, meeting with grassroots leaders, veterans, working-class Americans, real people, not political operatives. He built his own network. He supported candidates outside the establishment's control. And most importantly, he continued to expose the media for what they were. And the people listened. By the time the next election cycle rolled around, one thing was clear. Barron Trump wasn't just a viral moment. He was a movement. And for the first time in years, the establishment had no idea how to stop it. Barron Trump was no longer just the son of a former president. He was becoming a political phenomenon. The establishment had tried everything. They first ignored him, hoping his viral debate moment would fade away. It didn't. Then they attacked, running hit pieces and orchestrating coordinated media takedowns. But every smear campaign only made him stronger. The more they tried to discredit him, the more people rallied behind him. The final strategy, their controlled opposition plan, was now in full swing. A young, polished conservative figure handpicked by political elites was suddenly everywhere. He was getting primetime interviews, glowing magazine profiles, and the kind of media attention that was never given to true outsiders. The message was clear. This was the safe choice, the acceptable conservative. But Barron knew better. One evening, he sat in a quiet meeting with his closest advisors. His longtime friend Barrington laid out the plan. "They're trying to split your base," Barrington said, tapping a map of key battleground states. "They know they can't stop you outright, so they're throwing their own guy into the mix, hoping people will pick the safe option." Barron studied the map. He had spent months traveling the country, speaking directly to the people, farmers, veterans, small business owners, college students, tired of cancel culture. He knew what they wanted, and it wasn't another career politician groomed by the establishment. "They're betting that I'll attack him," Barron said calmly. "That's their play. They want to bait me into an internal fight so I look divisive." Barrington nodded. "So what's the move?" Barron smirked. "We don't play their game. We make them play ours." Over the next few weeks, Barron didn't take the bait. He never mentioned his so-called rival by name. Instead, he focused on the real fight, the corrupt media, the broken system, and the elites who thought they could control the American people. His speeches were electric. He called out the politicians who made empty promises, the billion-dollar media companies that lied to the public, and the tech giants that silenced dissent. He wasn't here to be part of the system. He was here to dismantle it. And people loved it. Crowds began chanting his name at events. Grassroots organizers, many of whom had never been involved in politics before, began forming groups to support him. Even those who had never supported his father admitted that Barron Trump was something different. He was the next evolution of the movement. The panic in Washington was growing. Meetings among high-level political operatives turned frantic. They had expected Barron to burn out, to make mistakes, to be reckless. Instead, he was running a flawless game. His discipline was unnerving. They couldn't control him. Then, the final act of desperation came. A leak. One evening, major news. Networks broke an exclusive story. Anonymous sources claimed they had dirt on Barron Trump. A scandal, something big. Social media exploded. The press hyped it up, teasing the story for hours before it finally dropped. And when it did, nothing. The so-called scandal was laughable, an out-of-context email from a high school project, a vague claim about a business deal that never even happened. It was weak, and worse for the media, the public saw right through it. Fake news began trending. People mocked the networks for their desperate attempt to take him down. Even some journalists admitted the hit piece was a joke. Once again, the establishment had failed. That night, Barron stood backstage at a massive rally. The crowd was roaring, waving American flags, holding up signs that read, "We see through the lies and Barron 2028." He took a deep breath. The world had underestimated him. The media had tried to destroy him. The elites had tried to stop him, and now, as he stepped onto that stage, standing before thousands of people who believed in his vision, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.